So I'm just going to lay out a timeline of everything that took place in case you have heard things, but you're hearing more speculation than you're hearing facts. And, yep, that's a natural byproduct, sadly, of any conversation about a famous athlete, celebrity who ends up finding themselves in trouble with the law. So on Tuesday night, a 911 call was made. We won't talk about the dispatcher. Ashley Sherman, Richard Sherman's wife, calls in and says that Richard had threatened to kill himself in this phone call to the police, that he had sent text messages to people saying he's going to hang himself. And you can hear the anguish in her voice throughout the phone call. And I don't want to play it. If you want to look at it, listen to it, you can go check it out, Cairo News. But I don't want to dive back into it. He said that if the police showed up, he'd try to fight them. During this phone call, you can hear Ashley trying to get Richard to stop from driving away. There was a physical altercation apparently before, too, with his uncle. He had had 2 bottles of liquor, vodka and Hennessey. And his wife, Ashley, was expressing concern that he might go to her parents' house in Redmond. So that's the first 911 call. It takes place, I'm assuming, late Tuesday night. A little bit later, there's a second 911 call. There is a male voice making said phone call. From what we understand, it's the uncle. Ashley Sherman started following Richard Sherman by car, so the uncle followed them both by car just to make sure that she's safe. They had thought they had taken all the keys away because Richard Sherman seems like was intoxicated and potentially looking to leave. You don't want him to drive after having 2 bottles, but he was still able to find some keys. It was a Dodge Challenger, I believe. And he was driving all over the place, and you can hear his concern, the uncle, over the course of the phone call. He stopped in the middle of the road to cut her off. He kept doing it when she was trying to go around him. Per the male voice, Richard Sherman did not have any firearms, but he might have had a knife, I guess a kitchen knife. And like you heard from Ashley, you heard that he's suicidal in this phone call as well, Richard Sherman. Sherman apparently had told his wife if the kids aren't in the car, he was going to hurt her. So that's what we had at first, and that's how this situation escalated to a point where we got to burglary, domestic violence. But before we get to that, I'm really hoping, and I think it's nothing more than hope at this point because it's hard to believe otherwise, I'm really hoping that this is just Richard Sherman in the midst of some extreme intoxication saying some things that he doesn't actually mean. And I've seen this before, and I know that at my absolute worst moments while intoxicated that I've myself even made similar comments, which were brought up to me after the fact a while ago, and it's one of those things that has led me to be a lot more responsible. I'm not perfect, though, and this is one of the tricks of alcohol. It's extremely dangerous, especially when you are consuming it, and you're in a state where you're not right of mind. You're distressed, you're sad, you're depressed, something like that. So the night continues, and you see a phone call made to 911, this time from a worker in a construction zone. He called Washington State Patrol about a possibly impaired driver after Richard Sherman drove his SUV into a closed, active construction zone. The vehicle ends up leaving the scene, parks in a parking lot, and was abandoned, but it had Sherman's registration on it. The tires popped of this car as it entered the construction zone and also seemed to have some damage, I think, to the left side of the car. Sherman is extremely lucky that no one in that construction site got hurt, and I think that's one of the things that we all should be thankful for, is that there could have been other completely innocent, completely removed from the situation victims here. Richard Sherman put himself in this situation, and while I do have empathy for whatever he might be going through, I think it's really important to note that he is responsible for the majority of what took place, whether it's his wife's anguish on a phone call being exposed to the national media, or the just conversations that are going to be taking place around Richard Sherman that he and his family are going to have to deal with, but specifically his family in the coming weeks. But also, I mean, he was an absolute menace on the road, and caused a confrontation that could have escalated to a point where, based off of the phone call he said earlier, where he said if police showed up, he'll try to fight them. I mean, that could have gone down horribly for him. I mean, you never know. If you're a police officer and you're trying to apprehend somebody and that person all of a sudden starts fighting, then what happens? You never know what's going to happen there. I think sometimes we look at that side of the job as if it is this easy job to do. No, it's not. It's very dangerous, and it's always one with uncertainty, and you're trying to not only protect those around you, but hopefully protect yourself. Anyway, so that call is made at 1:26. No injuries in the construction zone. At 1:49, Redmond Police responded to a 911 call of a burglary in progress, and they found Richard Sherman outside of a residence that belonged to Sherman's wife's parents. It's about 3 miles from the exit or so. Per the police press conference with Redmond Police Chief Darrell Lowe and Washington State Patrol Captain Ron Mead, Sherman physically resisted efforts to bring him into custody. And a canine unit, which was there, and I think it was because one of the first cop cars to respond just happened to be a canine unit, was eventually used. There was an odor of an intoxicant being emitted from his breath. One of the troopers tried to de-escalate things. Apparently, he knew him as a valet, but the situation got bad when Sherman was informed that police had probable cause to put him under arrest. He began to walk away, increased his pace, and the canine unit was deployed. I know that some have wondered, well, wait, why wasn't a taser used? Listen, I wasn't there. The police are going to give their side of the story. You can believe it. You don't have to believe it necessarily, whatever the case. Seems like they felt the need to apprehend him by force. Make your own judgment on that. I know everyone does these days. So, 6:08, Richard Sherman is booked at the King County Correctional Facility after a brief stint in the hospital where they treated the wound that he had on his ankle from the dog. And they also drew blood so that they can determine whether or not he was driving under the influence after the fact. He is being held without bail, as all domestic violence charges are held, until he meets with a judge this afternoon at about 2:30. The charges that are against him right now, at least based off of what we heard from Redmond Police Chief Darrell Lowe and Washington State Patrol Captain Ron Mead, are as follows. Burglary, domestic violence. That is because the home that he tried to break into, he has relations with them. They are his in-laws. No one sustained any injuries. Sherman did not gain entry, and I think that's important to note because sometimes you hear the words together, domestic violence, and you assume that there was actually someone hurt there. No, no one was hurt. Property was damaged, whether it was the construction site, the home, and obviously Richard Sherman's car, but it seems like no one got hurt outside of minor lacerations for Sherman and I think some minor lacerations for a police officer who's trying to restrain him. He was charged with resisting arrest as well, malicious mischief because of the damage to the front door, and there might be misdemeanor DUI hit and run. Not felony DUI hit and run. It sounds like it's misdemeanor, at least at this point in time, until we find out the results of the blood sample that they took from Richard Sherman. So there you go. Those are all the facts that we have right here. And they're hard to come to terms with because you just see that Richard Sherman clearly, for whatever reason, lost his grip. And I guess this is something that has been going on for a while. First off, we found out that the King County Sheriff's Office had obtained an extreme risk protection order against Sherman earlier this year to bar him from possessing firearms, according to court records. You heard Ashley Sherman on the phone call say that he was threatening to kill himself. You heard her uncle as well saying that he was suicidal. And then you hear this from Ian Rappaport, who said that Sherman's friends have been aware that he's been struggling.
One other thing I want to mention, there was a somewhat disturbing 911 call where Richard Sherman and his wife allude to some of the personal troubles that he is currently going through. My understanding is his close friends have been well aware of this and actually visited Sherman's house on a couple different occasions this offseason to try to intervene and help Richard Sherman deal with what he's dealing with personally. Obviously, the culmination of this was this incident that we are hearing about now.
So you add that up, and I mean, clearly something's wrong. What is it? I don't know. My assumption, and it's an assumption, it's speculation, it's nothing more than that, and it's based off of, I think, a slip-up by those two police officers who were carrying out the press conference yesterday, where they said ex-in-laws once, and then you saw Ashley Sherman on Twitter tweet out, no, there's no ex going on here. I think that they might have had some private conversations with her afterwards and said that, yeah, there's some perhaps marital problems going on. Maybe there's separation. Honestly, I can't say as to what they are, but I think that that might have been part of the problem. And the other part might be that this is a guy who's looking for a job in football and doesn't really know what he wants to do next and is having a difficult time maybe accepting that he is no longer the Richard Sherman, one of the greatest corners in NFL history. And I imagine for a lot of athletes that's difficult to deal with. That's not an excuse for the way that things went, but I'm trying to be empathetic here. And I think it's really important to note, no one got hurt. No one got hurt. I'm really thankful for that. Everyone should be thankful for that. Most of all, Richard Sherman. He is very fortunate that this did not get a lot worse than it actually could have been, especially if he was feeling these suicidal thoughts and had drank as much alcohol as he did. This could have been so much worse.